Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are Team Beijing, and we are here to present our vision of Ericsson 2015 and beyond. What we're going to talk about in the next 20 minutes or so is our vision of the two industries that we were given today, healthcare and energy. We're going to explore a little bit about the opportunities that exist broadly in these spaces, and specifically what are some of the viable business models for Ericsson in particular. We'll also look at some of the competitive landscapes, what are the partnerships, and what's the state of the ecosystem in those areas. And then we'll chart some roadmaps for success for 2015 and beyond. So we begin with healthcare. This is the space as it exists today, and as we see it evolving over the next 5 and 10 years. We've broken it down into developing countries and developed countries. The focus in both those environments is vastly different. In developing countries, the focus is on expanding access to primary care, and how can you use technology to ensure maximum coverage to the largest number of people. Today, we see SMS-based services all across the developing world in India, Kenya, other parts of the world. In 2015, we're going to see intelligent, integrated primary care centers all over the developing world. And what we mean by that is semi-trained paramedics will be able to use devices like the iPad to provide quality care to patients beyond what they do today. We're also going to see a bottoms-up metrics and data gathering approach in these developing countries. If we switch focus to the developed countries, and particularly the US, we see that the focus over the last 5 and 10 years has been on efficiency gains, cost reduction, and patient choice. What we see today is a renewed emphasis on electronic health records, and e-health is becoming m-health. What that means is today you use WebMD and such tools online to access healthcare, and that's going to become mobile, and it's going to become ubiquitous. In 2015, we see device-first diagnostics, which means the first interaction that you have with your medical provider is going to be on a mobile device. That device will be seamlessly integrated with the entire ecosystem, and network-enabled intelligent devices and biosensors will feed information real-time into that network. In 2020, we see a convergence of technologies in both these spaces. You're going to see broad adoption of outcomes-based compensation, metrics-based medicine, heavy emphasis on medical analytics, and open consumer-centric data exchange. So what do we see as the future of Ericsson in this ecosystem? And the term that we've coined is the secure healthcare cloud. And what we mean by that is these are the key stakeholders in this environment today: the government, providers, and patients. These are some of the other players in this marketplace. We have the carriers, the pharma and device manufacturers, insurance companies, and players like Google and HealthWall and Microsoft. I'd like to focus your attention to the insurance companies and providers in particular, because that's where we see the most value for Ericsson. We'll be looking at this as an Android-esque ecosystem, where Ericsson provides the entire platform from top to bottom as a greenfield solution that people are able to deploy for free. And providers will be incented to use this system because the system will enable them to employ electronic healthcare records. They're getting this for free. What they're paying for today will be available for free. And as a result, we see Ericsson getting access to data that is otherwise hard to obtain. Once we have this data, then entire ecosystem can be based around this data, and in particular for the insurance companies. And I'd like to walk you through the model in the next slide. We did some numbers, and we are estimating that the data market in the US alone is $1 billion NPV opportunity for Ericsson. We made some very conservative estimates, and we're seeing 3.8 million customers' data managed in the secure cloud over the next 10 years. If we are able to get providers to use our system and put the data in the cloud, insurance companies will be more than happy to pay for access to that data. Fraud will be reduced. There will be better risk management from the insurance industry perspective. And as a result, we see about a 5% reduction in payout ratio for insurance companies, but a 1% reduction in overhead. As a result, Ericsson can lay claim to 25% of the savings that will accrue as a result of this, and that translates to this opportunity. One thing that must be noted is that there's a significant investment upfront, and therefore you see the NPV being negative in the first couple of years before it starts ramping up and really becomes a $1 billion opportunity. And this literature has been repeated over and over again. Any website that you look at claims with good insight that data is a $1 billion plus opportunity in the coming years.
So moving on to environment like Kenya, which is a developing nation. So what we're looking at here is a social impact of what we could possibly do with this solution. So we are looking at a 25 million contribution to GDP of Kenya year on year. So how this could be achieved is by saving lives. So we are estimating like around 50,000 preventable deaths happen in Kenya year on year. And if at least 5% of the primary healthcare could be moved to this system, we are looking at saving 2,500 lives. And with an estimate of $10,000 per person into the GDP of Kenya, say like 40 years of his life or her life, we are looking at 25 million contribution to GDP. So this is a social impact, but then this is not a revenue impact. So the revenue could possibly come in through the WHO, through the government grants, through the government subsidies that Ericsson could get in terms of implementing this solution. So now achieving dominance in the ecosystem, of course, would be a challenge. So in order to look at what various aspects of the challenges are, I would like you to concentrate on first the insurance companies. So they are more like a monopoly, especially in the US. And we are trying to get a pie of their revenue, their income. So the reluctance of them to give up that part of it is one major challenge that we have to overcome. The second thing would be our entire dependence on device manufacturers. So now until the devices go in and until the devices let us access the data, we don't get to have the data as a backend. So in terms of the contracts with them, in terms of the joint partnerships with them, that is again going to be a challenge. So what exactly should Ericsson do in terms of partnerships and maybe like deepen the existing ones or form new ones? So again, insurance providers would be the major thing, where Ericsson would have to form new ventures. To do that, it's not like possible wherein we could just walk in and like say like we need to partner with you. So we would have to do maybe like small joint ventures, small pilot programs, get their confidence, get them to know like, okay, they have this data and the use of that data. And that's how we could build upon. And as you saw the slide previously, it takes time, but then we can penetrate the market slowly. And the next thing would be in terms of the device manufacturers. So big companies like GE, who already do big medical devices, and the small new startups that are in the market. So like maybe partnerships, get them funding to develop their devices, get them break even, get them the devices in the market, and that is how that's the way to go forward. So in terms of the roadmap, year on year for Ericsson from now on, right now, the first thing is to get the device manufacturers to manufacture them, start the data collection process so that we can start getting the data for analysis. 2013, we envision, say, the Android stack, equivalent of that, the technology stack has to go out. And the doctor should start using them, start realizing the benefits, and the patients add on to the data collection. The 2015, what we're looking at is the existing partnership that Ericsson has with Akamai. And so leverage that, develop the backend, develop the systems, put them in place, and have the data and start analyzing the patterns, start analyzing the data, mining the data, wherein we can now go on in 2017 plus, go on to the insurance partners and say, like, see, this is what you stand to get if you give us the, or if you partner with us. And in 2017 onwards, the next step would be like we have so many legacy systems in medical devices, like X-ray machines, CAT scanners, which are not mobile sensitive or mobile knowledgeable. So now we need those devices to be enabled to again give us data so that that again can be added on to the data set that we have. Now, again, few more challenges that we could possibly face. The first and the major one would be companies like GE and Siemens, who have broad capabilities and global presence like Ericsson, I mean like 100 plus countries. So those are possible threats wherein they have the capabilities to do what we are planning to do. And I would also try to concentrate your attention on the hospitals part of it. So the problems with hospitals opening up is the fact that right now they have a number of patients treated approach rather than the outcome of treatment approach, wherein they don't care as to how well the treatment is, but then they care on the number of patients or the footfall that they get. So the moment they start opening up the data and when we start analyzing it and realizing that, okay, now we can say categorize the quality of treatment, hospitals would not want to do that. So being transparent about their system is what they would be hesitant about, and that is exactly what we would want for getting all the data. So that is going to be a major challenge. Moving on to energy.
So I'm going to talk a little bit first about the broad vision for the energy sector. And before I start, I think it's worthwhile to mention that the energy sector, as you and I know it, has been this way probably for the past 200 years. You have this holy trinity of power generators, power transmission companies, and power distribution companies. And our vision of the energy sector going ahead is that this entire model is going to be turned on its head. So by that, what I mean is, instead of having dedicated companies to generation, transmission, and distribution, we envision the energy ecosystem changing into sort of a connected energy cloud. What that means is you, as an end consumer, can typically have a solar panel installed on the top of your house, and you essentially will then become a power generator where you can kind of put energy back into this cloud, and you can take energy as and when you need it. And similarly for power generating companies. So the analogy that we used to sort of reconcile this was in terms of thinking of the energy cloud as a data cloud or as the internet, for example, wherein if you have, let's say, any sort of a device that requires power, that's equivalent to not just a power cord, but that's actually the same as having maybe a USB cord, and you just plug in, you take data, or you transmit data back to the cloud. So in terms of talking about the actual connected energy cloud, we see a number of collaborators that come together to actually facilitate this cloud. And this is already happening in real time as we speak. I'm sure most of you are aware of Boulder, Colorado, which is America's first actual smart grid in place. I mean, this is the model that they're following, essentially. I'm sure those of you from Austin, Texas also know that there's this kind of a program being launched. So this is ground reality as we speak. So in terms of the cloud enablers, very briefly, we have system integrators who are the architects of the entire cloud and who sort of deploy these clouds in various cities at a local level. You have technology vendors who bring in the various technology expertise requirements, starting from smart meters to routers and switches and so on. You have the power and utility integrators who actually facilitate the laying of the power cables, if you will. Then you have energy storage, which is a nascent sector right now in terms of fuel cells and so on, but this is expected to really grow rapidly going ahead. And then finally, you have service providers that provide just the entire communication protocol and so on and so forth. So let me direct your attention now to two specific models which we feel have considerable value for Ericsson. The first model is in terms of facilitating the connection of the end consumers to the connected energy cloud, and we refer to this as the EMS, or the Energy Management Solution for Ericsson. The second one is in terms of actually connecting the power generators to the cloud, and we refer to this as the demand response platform. So the EMS and the DRP are two things I'm going to spend a little more time talking about. The whole thing is, if you want to actually facilitate this, the one thing that we've realized in our research, and this quote captures it beautifully, the only thing stopping everyone over here from actually going out and buying these smart grid devices and connecting them is the unavailability to send and receive data. And we feel that this is one clear advantage that Ericsson has, and one clear advantage that Ericsson would sort of be able to expedite and catalyze in terms of bringing that cloud to a much more expedited reality. So a little bit about the EMS. Now, I'm going to go through a bit of a business model analysis that we put forward, and maybe define some of the specific, the specific product specifications that we could look at from Ericsson's point of view. So first and foremost, for an end consumer, you have to provide them a smartphone app, which will actually enable the user to monitor, okay, what's happening in my house right now in terms of real time. So that's in terms of monitoring what's the actual usage, what is your load response programs, for example. Can you participate through your cell phone wherever you are? Secondly, we envisage a web-based monitoring solution provided to end consumers, so you can go online wherever you are in the world and actually switch on and switch off devices in your house, and so to speak. And thirdly, I think the most innovative piece of this particular solution is the LBS-enabled device platform. So let's say you know that you're going to be home in about 15 minutes. Your phone automatically realizes, based on either Foursquare or in terms of Facebook check-in or whatnot, you know that you're about 15 minutes away. So you can actually program your phone to automatically start or stop particular devices. And the device that we featured here is actually a water heater from GE. So these kind of devices are already commercial ready, so to speak. So in terms of the specific business model, what we envisage is, by installing these smart meters in your homes, you can save potentially $500 per month at least. So we're saying that, okay, Ericsson will probably charge a flat $100 per meter per household fee in terms of the EMS model. So in terms of the demand response platform, the entire value proposition is that given a particular power generator, we need to stabilize the variance that they see in terms of the demand that they experience. I mean, in terms of a coal generating plant, for example, every time you have a variance in the demand, you're going to be hit by huge operating costs. Every time it's not stable demand, for example. So we're looking at specifically 3 opportunities that we can play in as Ericsson. The first is in terms of distributed generation. So actually bringing the solar panels I mentioned earlier online and bringing them into the smart energy cloud that we discussed. Secondly, if you look at energy trading, what this effectively does is, in terms of the people who have solar panels connected, you can, so take the example of PG&E, for example. So you can actually buy power back to meet those variations. You don't need to actually bring a separate reactor online or anything along those lines. And thirdly, in terms of the variable pricing models, so this is kind of already in play, but not to the kind of scale that Ericsson can expedite it to. So in terms of the kind of specific business model, we envisage a fixed subscription fee per power generator, plus about 5 to 10% of the dollar savings.
So what does all of this really translate to in terms of numbers? So we did a few calculations here, and we kind of project that the actual revenue impact or revenue gain for Ericsson from this opportunity is going to be $1.4 billion by 2015. So just kind of breaking it up between the EMS and DRP. So in EMS, the revenue growth is really coming from the adoption of smart meters across the homes in the US, which is slated to grow up to 68 million households by 2015. So as was mentioned, we would just charge a flat, say, $100, which is just 20% of the savings that they can make per year, which is kind of a fairly small estimate to go by. And doing that, we get almost a revenue of $1.1 billion from just the EMS opportunity. And on the DRP opportunity, all the demand shifts that we talked about, if those are flattened out, that really translates into $50 million of saving per plant. So if we just get about 10%, 15% of that saving that we are going to give to that plant, that translates to almost $0.3 billion in revenue. So total up, it's about $1.4 billion for Ericsson. So having said that, so who are the major competition in this space? As we see it, the competition is at two ends of the spectrum. On one side, there are huge conglomerates like GE, Cisco, IBM, who are kind of just thereabouts, but have the scale to really ramp up whenever this technology comes online. And so that's why they are a threat. But on the other side, there are the niche technology vendors, which really have the IP that can give the actual value of this solution. So which is worse, which is a bigger competition? We think that the niche technology vendors are a bigger competition for us because they are the gatekeepers of the technology. If you don't side with them, you are not really going to get the value out of all of the solutions that we really mentioned previously. So having said that, so how does Ericsson position itself in this ecosystem? So what we are really saying, as I mentioned before, is we really closely partner with the technology vendors, the niche technology IP vendors, even look at acquisitions to a certain extent. And also, at the same time, have unbiased negotiate contracts with system integrators, energy storage, power utility integrators, etc. But I guess another important resource that Ericsson can really leverage is its relations with the service providers. The users for AT&T and Verizon could be the low-hanging fruits for someone like Ericsson to really deploy its own systems there. So the vision that we spoke about initially about energy, how does Ericsson really achieve that? So to do that, first and foremost, Ericsson has to deploy applications that will let users monitor the electric usage and also, to some extent, maintain and optimize manually. That would be now. By 2013, we say take this maintenance optimization to an automated stage. So really make the home not a networked home, but a smart home in that sense. What happens in 2015 is Ericsson should have kind of analytics or analytics engine in place so that it can really forecast demands, forecast supplies really better. So once that is in place, then in 2017 onwards, we can really see the actual deployment of what we call as microgrid environment in this space, which will give the actual benefits that we spoke about earlier. So to wrap it up, should we get into healthcare? Should we get into energy? Definitely. The numbers are out there. questions.
Great presentation, team. I have a quick question that goes back to the articulation of the challenges you laid out. The models for both energy and healthcare are set because of the way the structure has kind of worked out with both insurance providers in healthcare and the utility companies in energy. What is the value proposition you would recommend for Ericsson to take to these two key stakeholders for this vision to be realized, that they would turn around and say, all right, Ericsson, you make a good point, we want to listen to you? What would that be?
So I'll take the question from the insurance perspective. I think insurance companies, the biggest value that we can add as Ericsson is clearly the data that we have. A couple of things that insurance companies are concerned about is first accurate data. How can they perfectly price discriminate, if you will? You know, someone who's high risk needs to pay a high premium, someone who's low risk needs to pay a low premium. That may not be sort of morally justifiable to a lot of people, but that's exactly what they're trying to do. If you have perfect data, that's one of the biggest things that insurance companies will pay for. Second is they're trying to reduce fraud. One of the big sort of costs that insurance companies have to sort of incur is verifying your medical history before they're able to issue a medical policy. If Ericsson can become sort of the de facto data storage engine with their, and make it secure and make it sort of user controlled, insurance companies will more than happily pay for e-records that they can verify that are fraud fraud protected, if you will. And if we are able to do this, then we actually ran the numbers. If we are able to just generate 5% reduction in payout ratio from an average of 65% to 60%, and a 1% reduction in overhead, which is about 8.5% right now to 7.5%. Those are really conservative estimates. You could really take this all the way and get a lot of savings. But if you can do that, that alone translates to like $1 billion in opportunities for Ericsson. So we think that is a convincing case both for the insurance companies and for Ericsson to press this case.
So I'll take the question up from the utilities perspective. So I pointed this out earlier in terms of thinking about the power cloud in terms of a data cloud is essentially. So let's take the analogy further and talk about the power network in terms of an internet, for example. So in an internet, I mean, if you have a series of computers connected in a network, if you want to find out whether one particular computer is down, you can automatically find out whether it's down, whether it's about to go down by measuring the packets, for example, that is being transferred. The exact same analogy can now be applied to a distribution company, for example. Right now, whenever a transformer goes down, they find out about it and they react. They will never know going ahead, okay, this particular transformer is showing signs of failure. It's probably going to go down the next hour or so. But having this sort of an interconnected grid where there's a power network overlapped with the data network will actually allow the utilities to better manage, not only, that'll effectively avoid brownouts, but also point out, okay, which transformer is likely to go down. So I think that is one key objective or one key value proposition that Ericsson can go in with to the utilities. And secondly, I think it's in terms of just the load management. So in terms of just being able to predict, that the data that is out there in terms of usage patterns is a phenomenal goldmine for any generation company, any transmission company in the traditional sense of the word. So when they know that, okay, this is the data this is the usage that we need to supply at a constant level, we know it's going to peak at, let's say, arbitrarily, let's say in Los Angeles, we know that, okay, 1:30 p.m. is when it's going to peak, for example. So they know that, okay, at 1:30 p.m., I need to find out sources within that particular power grid where I can source that extra power from. So we think that is the second key value proposition that Ericsson can propose.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. So thank you for a very good presentation. In relation to the healthcare aspects of your analysis, could you clarify for me, how do you see Ericsson in terms of being an orchestrator? You've made some recommendations very clearly, but in terms of orchestrating this whole environment and the ecosystem, what do you recommend specifically?
So the specific recommendation that we have is what we call the secure healthcare cloud. I think the biggest fear that people have today is my data safe in the cloud? Should my private medical records be in the cloud, and will they be safe? Will they be fraud? Will they be hacked, and all that sort of thing? The analogy that I have is mobile banking and online banking. 15 years ago, people were really, really afraid about putting their banking data online, and that sort of evolved over the last 15 years as protocols have been put in place and banks have sort of figured out how to detect fraud, prevent fraud. I think something similar is going to happen in the healthcare space, and we think Ericsson is the player to do it because they have sort of broad reach into all aspects of the industry. Then they have relationships with people like AT&T. But they have also the clout that can get them on the table with someone like Aetna and Athena Health. A small startup that's trying to do exactly this will never get at the table with an insurance company, just going through the motion. So someone like Ericsson can really drive this process, build sort of a greenfield project that says, hey, this is how we think the future of healthcare is going to work. Once the technology is out there, once it's been demonstrated, people will latch on to it, and it will sort of become the app store of the healthcare industry. Ericsson's platform is where people connect and barter information about healthcare. So that's where we think the value for Ericsson really lies.
And just to add on to it, why Ericsson? Because what we propose is mobile. Everything is mobile. And Ericsson is in the best position because it is almost 40% of the traffic goes through mobile. And as in 40% of the mobile traffic goes through Ericsson. And that's why I think, we think that Ericsson is the best player to do this.
Thank you.
Okay, so question on your ecosystem slide in healthcare. So this, yeah, just stay on that slide. That's a good slide.
Okay.
So there's potential competitors in the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
How do you propose we address those guys?
Sure. So the people that we're looking at is people like Google and Microsoft. So the benefit that Ericsson in particular has is the number of countries that we are in. So 170 countries, the presence that we have, let it be, say, Asia, let it be the Europe, let it be in the US, the partnerships that we already have with the carriers in that particular place, joint venture that we have with a company like, say, Akamai right now, wherein they again have a presence across the world in terms of content delivery networks. So that unique proposition, that like the unique position of Ericsson is what is going to enable us to be the best player and overcome the potential competitors in the cloud.
I just wanted to just to add on to that. I think one way to look at it also is let's compare two individual patients, right? So let's say one patient has the opportunity to upload his or her data onto whatever Google's analogy to what we are proposing that Ericsson goes into, and secondly, let's look at another patient who actually goes to a hospital which has one of Ericsson's free EHR systems in place. So there is no real incentive for the first patient to upload his or her data. He's fine with life as it is. I mean, the status quo is being maintained. But if you look at the other model which we propose that Ericsson goes with, what happens is that as soon as this particular patient goes into the hospital, the doctor is the key opinion leader who will influence that particular patient to say, hey, you know what, why don't you just sign this waiver? And why don't you use Ericsson's particular model in place? And the reason why the doctor will influence this particular, the second patient, is because we can easily build that into the model that we offer the doctor. So for example, let's say every time, let's take a particular hospital, anyone, like let's say Mass Gen, for example. Let's say the particular model that Ericsson proposes, when Mass Gen hits, let's say 70% of their patients are covered in the EHR system, we incentivize them with either an upgrade or maybe 10 new iPads or something with which they can capture data more effectively. So to kind of summarize, I mean, in the first case, there's no real key opinion leader who will influence the person to go and say, you know what, go and use Google Health. It's only Google that says, okay, use Google Health or whatever. But in the second case, the actual doctor who you go to, who is pretty much an influencer on the way that you manage your medical lifestyle, is the one who's going to say, why don't you sign this form and go in for this.
Final question, please.
So if that's the case, why should Ericsson be successful compared to a Siemens or a GE Medical? Why should Ericsson be successful in convincing the doctors in the hospitals to adopt our EHR?
Right. So I can actually give you a bit of a personal spin on this because I actually worked on a consulting engagement which involved GE's PACS system, which is essentially their EHR system. And the one thing is, A, they cost a bomb for any hospital to install. Ericsson is giving away an essential skeletal framework for free. So I think that is one huge incentive for people to go in for Ericsson as opposed to going in for a GE healthcare or something of that sort. And secondly, it's in terms of the entire. I mean, Ericsson comes in not as a part of a consortium, but they come in with a bulk of the offerings provided by themselves. So, for example, the tie-up with Akamai, as we know about, that essentially gives it that cloud capability. You have the mobile capability already, and then you have the broadband capability. So, we feel that the intersection of those three provides Ericsson with a really good sweet spot to sort of hit a home run in this market as compared to its competitors.
And again, in the same space, again, what we spoke about some time back, being in there in the mobile space really helps Because what we are talking about is you can track your healthcare records on your phone, on your iPad, anywhere. And that is why Ericsson is a big player here. Thank you very much.